10 days before Thanksgiving, our first without Margaret, my kids called to tell me they'd be spending it in Cabo. I was standing in the kitchen peeling sweet potatoes the way Margaret used to, when Kevin's voice came through the speakerphone. He sounded distracted, like someone ordering coffee while checking his email. "Dad," he said, "we wanted to tell you early so you can plan something for yourself. We're, skipping Thanksgiving this year." I stopped peeling. "Skipping?" "Yeah," he continued quickly. "Rachel found this healing retreat in Cabo. We just need space, to grieve our own way." For a second I thought I'd misheard him. "Space?" I repeated. "Your mother's chair will still be at the table. Her recipes, her—" "Dad, don't take it personally," Kevin interrupted, sighing. "We just need to reset. We'll FaceTime, okay?" I could hear voices in the background, Rachel's laughter, Matthew saying something about booking the ocean view rooms. I asked quietly, "You've already booked it, haven't you?" Kevin hesitated. "Yeah, non-refundable. Rachel got a deal before prices went up." Non-refundable. That word sat heavy in my chest. I wanted to yell, but what was the point? They'd already made their choice. When the call ended, I just stood there, holding a half-peeled potato, staring at the empty kitchen doorway. Margaret used to hum while she cooked. I swear I could still hear her voice fading through the house. They said they needed space. What they meant was distance. The house had never felt so large, or so small. Every corner echoed her absence. 42 years of shared meals, laughter, burned rolls, midnight coffee, gone. Still, I decided I'd keep our tradition. I pulled out her recipe box, the one with flour-dusted cards written in her looping handwriting. "If it's just me," I whispered, "then I'll do it right." The night before Thanksgiving, I stayed up until nearly midnight. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air. Her cranberry glaze simmered on the stove, and I could almost hear her say, "Don't forget the cinnamon, Joe." When I finally set the table, I used her good china, the kind she saved for special occasions. 15 dishes, all perfectly placed, and one chair at the end, her chair, left untouched. I laid her favorite napkin on it, folded into a neat triangle. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, hitting the family photos on the wall. Kevin's graduation, Rachel's wedding, Matthew's startup ribbon cutting, all of them smiling, none of them here. I brewed her brand of coffee, dark roast with a hint of vanilla, and sat down alone. The clock ticked loud in the silence. Halfway through breakfast, my phone buzzed, a notification from Instagram. I opened it and saw Rachel's post. There they were, my 3 children, standing barefoot in white sand, raising margaritas. The caption read, "Living our best life. Mom would want this." My hands went cold. I zoomed in. Rachel was wearing a blessed and grateful shirt. Matthew had a tan already. Kevin was holding his phone, smiling toward the sea. Blessed and grateful. I set the phone down, feeling something inside me twist. Not just pain, but something sharper. Betrayal, maybe. Not because they were in Cabo, but because they thought that was love. I tried to eat, but every bite turned to ash. Around noon, I stood up and started washing dishes I hadn't even used, just to keep busy. Water ran, bubbles rose, and all I could think was how Margaret used to hum over that same sink, her hands soft from decades of care. By evening, the house smelled like a memory, sweet, heavy, and hollow. I poured myself a glass of her favorite wine, one we'd been saving for our 43rd anniversary. The label read, "Forever Together." I laughed once, the kind that one's too close to crying. When the sun set, I walked into the dining room one last time. 15 dishes untouched. The candles still flickered faintly. Margaret's chair faced me like she was waiting for me to say grace. I sat down across from it. "You'd probably tell me to let them live their lives," I said softly. "But you'd also say family shows up, even when it's inconvenient." The air felt heavier. I could almost feel her presence, quiet but firm, the way she used to look at me when she wanted me to see the truth I was avoiding. I reached for her chair, resting my hand on the back of it. The wood was warm under my palm. "You were right, weren't you?" I whispered. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window. The candles flickered out, one by one, until the room was dark. The day after Thanksgiving, I opened the envelope Margaret told me to read only when the time comes. It had been sitting in my desk drawer for months, sealed in cream-colored paper, her neat handwriting spelling my name, Joe. The ink had faded just slightly, but her scent still clung to it, that faint mix of lavender and soap she loved. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside were 2 pages of her handwriting. The first line stopped me cold. "If you're reading this, our children have shown their true character." I sank into my chair. The study was dim except for the light of the desk lamp. Her photo sat beside the letter, smiling, alive, a scarf covering her thinning hair from chemo. She'd known. She'd seen this coming long before I did. Her letter went on. "Don't feel guilty. You're not abandoning them. They've abandoned you. I added flexibility clauses to our will for this reason. Use them as you see fit. Character, not blood, should decide inheritance." I paused, rubbing my temple. Flexibility clauses? I hadn't thought much about it when she insisted on those changes months ago. I'd signed the papers, trusting her use. Dual thoroughness. I thought it was just another one of her careful touches. A safety net for what if. But she had been protecting me from this exact moment. I kept reading. "You and I both know who's shown up for us these past 2 years. The Browns, the Davises. They didn't share our DNA, but they shared our burdens. They brought warmth when our own children brought excuses." She even listed them by name, Tom and Sarah, their children, their kindnesses. "Presence is love's proof," she wrote. "Don't reward absence." I leaned back, closing my eyes. Her words were calm, certain, but they burned like truth too sharp to touch. Could I really do it? Could I cut our children out of what they expected? I imagined Kevin's face, full of confidence and control, Rachel's easy charm, Matthew's restless ambition. They'd all assumed the inheritance was their birthright, the final thank you for being our children. But Margaret was right. What had they given when it mattered most? I stood up, pacing. The house felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves were listening. Every photo seemed to stare back, asking me to decide what love should cost. Finally, I reached for the phone and dialed Robert Mitchell, our family attorney. He picked up on the second ring. "Joe," he said, his voice warm, professional. "How are you holding up?" I hesitated. "Robert, I'm reading something Margaret left me, something about the will." "Ah," he said softly, "the flexibility clause. She mentioned that before she passed." "She did?" I asked, surprised. "She wanted to make sure you could adjust distributions based on behavior after her death," he explained. "It was unusually wise foresight. Most people can't imagine their children failing them." I swallowed hard. "She could." He paused. "Do you want to come in? We can review everything." An hour later, I sat across from him in his office. The air smelled faintly of leather and old paper. He spread the documents across his polished mahogany desk, aligning them neatly. "These," he said, tapping the folder, "give you full discretion. You can redirect any portion of the estate as long as you believe it honors Margaret's intent. Even if that means not giving it to the kids?" He nodded slowly. Even then, I looked out his window. A gray drizzle streaked down the glass. "They said they needed space," I murmured. "Well, maybe it's time I gave it to them." Robert's brow furrowed. "Are you sure you want to go down that road? Once you exercise this clause, there's no undoing it." I leaned forward, resting my palms on the desk. "Robert, I spent 18 months watching my wife fade away. The people who were there for her, who were there for me, weren't the ones who shared our name. They were the ones who showed up." He nodded quietly. "Margaret was wise. You have full authority." I exhaled. My voice was steady now. "Then maybe it's time someone learned what family really means." He gave a faint smile, one of understanding rather than approval. "All right. I'll start the paperwork. You'll just need to sign." I hesitated. The sound of the pen clicking open echoed in the room. Robert looked at me carefully. "Joe," he said, his tone gentler now, "are you sure? Once you sign, there's no taking it back." The pen felt heavy in my hand, but Margaret's words echoed louder. "Presence is love's proof." And I realized I wasn't taking anything away. I was simply giving where love had already been given. Before I made any decisions, I wanted to see the people who had already earned Margaret's trust. The Saturday after Thanksgiving, I drove across town to Tom and Sarah Davis's place, Margaret's cousins. Their house wasn't big, but it had that lived-in warmth money can't buy, the kind where shoes pile by the door and the smell of something home-cooked hangs in the air. As I stepped in, Sarah wiped her hands on a towel and smiled. "Joe, you should have told us you were coming. We would have put on coffee." "I brought some," I said, holding up a small bag of the blend Margaret used to love. Their youngest, Emma, ran through the hallway, chased by her brother with a toy plane. Laughter filled the space. I hadn't heard that sound in my house for a long time. Sarah led me to the kitchen table. It was crowded with dishes, half a casserole, a basket of dinner rolls, a pie cooling on the counter. "Tom's at the garage finishing a customer's car," she said. "He'll be back soon. He still talks about those chemo runs with Margaret. Said she was the toughest passenger he ever had." I blinked. "He mentioned that?" "Oh, all the time." She smiled sadly. "He took days off work for it. Wouldn't let me drive her alone. Said if family can't do that, what good are we?" Her words hit deeper than she knew. My own children hadn't driven Margaret anywhere after the first month. Too busy. Always too busy. Tom came in a few minutes later, wiping grease from his hands, face lighting up when he saw me. "Joe, man, it's good to see you." We shook hands, and he clapped my shoulder like brothers do. "How are you holding up?" "Trying," I said. "House feels different without her." He nodded, eyes softening. "Yeah, Sarah still sets out an extra mug every Sunday morning." We sat, and conversation flowed easy. I hadn't planned to stay long, but an hour passed before I realized it. They told me stories I'd never heard, how Margaret would joke with nurses, how she'd insist on baking something for every hospital staff member during her better days. Sarah laughed through tears. "Do you remember when she demanded we rearrange your whole kitchen? She said you'd never reach the spices once the wheelchair came in." I chuckled. I came home to find every cabinet moved. Took me weeks to find the sugar again. Sarah's eyes shone. She wanted to stay independent as she could. We just tried to make it easier. For a moment, the room went quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. The smell of casserole filled the space between us. I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of photo albums. "I brought these. Margaret always said she wanted you to have copies someday." Sarah took the top album carefully, her thumb tracing the cover. "Oh, she never told me that." We opened it together. The photos went back decades. Birthdays, camping trips, hospital visits. One showed Tom pushing Margaret's wheelchair under the cherry blossoms. Another caught Sarah holding a bowl of soup, feeding her when her hands trembled too much to hold the spoon. Their kids peeked over our shoulders, pointing and smiling. "That's Grandma Maggie," Emma said, her little voice proud. "She taught me how to fold napkins like flowers." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "She loved you, you know. Talked about you every week." Sarah wiped her eyes. "We just did what anyone would, Joe." I shook my head. "Not everyone did." Tom reached for my hand across the table. "You don't owe us anything, Joe. She was family. That was enough." But in that moment, I realized they didn't know Margaret had already seen them as more than family. She'd seen them as proof that goodness still existed. We spent the afternoon sharing stories, laughter, and silence that didn't hurt. When I finally stood to leave, Sarah insisted I take a casserole. "You shouldn't eat alone," she said. At the door, the kids hugged me tight. "Bye, Grandpa Joe," Emma shouted as she ran back to her toys. Grandpa Joe. I froze for a second. No one had called me that since Margaret's passing. As I stepped onto the porch, the late afternoon sun caught something on Emma's hand, a small gold ring, simple but familiar. I looked closer. My breath caught. It was Margaret's ring, the one she used to wear on her right hand, the one she'd stopped wearing months before she died. "Pretty, isn't it?" Sarah said softly behind me. "She gave it to Emma last spring, said she wanted her, to have something shiny for her future." I nodded slowly, heart pounding. Margaret had already started giving her blessings away long before the will ever came into question. I walked to my car, the casserole warm in my hands, the ring glinting in my mind, and for the first time since she'd gone, I felt certain Margaret knew exactly what she was doing. Robert spread the will across his mahogany desk like a battlefield map. Every line, every clause, every signature carried the weight of Margaret's last intentions, and the storm that was about to follow. The office smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Cool light filtered through half-drawn blinds, glinting off framed law degrees and a silver nameplate. Robert Mitchell, Esquire. He'd handled our family's affairs for decades. He'd been at our wedding, our children's christenings, even at the hospital the night Margaret passed. But now, he looked at me not as a friend, but as an executor preparing for war. "Joe," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "you understand that once we set this in motion, there's no taking it back." I nodded, though my throat was dry. "Margaret made the decision. I'm just carrying it out." Robert adjusted his glasses and tapped the will with his pen. "She didn't just make a decision. She made a statement." He slid the top page toward me, the ink faintly smudged where Margaret's trembling hand had once signed. "Look here. Clause 19b. Failure of filial duty during illness constitutes grounds for forfeiture of inheritance." The words hit like a gavel. "So she meant it," I murmured, "not just words said in pain." Robert nodded. "She knew what she was doing. She even asked me to draft it in plain English so there'd be no loopholes. If your kids challenge it, they'll lose." I stared at the page. The memory of those hospital nights returned. The empty chairs, unanswered calls, the nurse whispering, "She's still asking if they're coming." Robert leaned back. "She also created something else, a clause I've never seen in any will before." He turned a few pages and pointed to a new section, typed in clean black font. "To establish the Margaret L. Holloway Memorial Research Fund, dedicated to advancing treatments for pancreatic cancer, with an initial endowment of 1/3 total estate value." My head lifted. She never mentioned that. "She wanted to surprise you," Robert said softly. "Said she wanted to make sure something good outlived her, something beyond property and grudges." I exhaled slowly. That sounds like her. Robert folded his hands. "Now there's the practical side. Once we move forward with these revisions, your children will receive letters notifying them of their disinheritance and their right to contest. If they do, it could get ugly." "Let them," I said quietly. "They already left long before the paperwork did." He studied me. "You're sure?" "Absolutely." He gave a small nod, then began pulling out a new set of documents. Transfer authorizations, fund initiation forms, and signature lines that felt like the closing chapters of a life. As he worked, the sound of the pen scratching paper filled the silence. My mind wandered. To Margaret in her recliner, reading, her hand resting on mine. To her whisper one night, "If they can't show up when it matters, they don't deserve what matters." When Robert pushed the final set of papers forward, my hand didn't tremble. I signed each one carefully, the ink pooling slightly under my pen. "That's the preliminary authorization," he said. "I'll handle the fund setup and begin the property transfers to the Browns and Davises, pending verification." I looked up. "They don't even know that's coming." He smiled faintly. "Then they'll be the only ones who take it with grace." We both knew he was right. "Joe," he continued, his tone quieter now, "Margaret's plan is airtight, but it won't be painless. Once your children find out, they'll come for you. Personally, emotionally, maybe legally." I looked him in the eye. "Robert, I buried my wife 2 weeks ago. There's not much left they can take." He sighed, closing the file gently. "You sound like a man who's already made peace." "I have," I said. "She deserved better than their excuses." For a long moment, we sat in silence. 2 men surrounded by law books and ghosts. Finally, Robert slid a small envelope across the desk. "Margaret left this with me too. Said to give it to you when you signed." Inside was a note, written in her unmistakable cursive, "Thank you for being the one who stayed." I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until it came out as a shaky sigh. When I looked up again, Robert had already begun stacking the signed papers neatly. "All right," he said, his tone turning brisk again. "Transfers begin Monday. I'll confirm with the banks, and you'll get notices once the checks are cleared." I stood, straightening my coat. "And after that?" Robert gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "After that," he said, "you'll want to unplug your phone." The clock ticked behind him, loud and deliberate. Margaret had drawn her line from beyond the grave, and I had just helped her make it permanent. The world has a cruel sense of timing. The day the wire transfers cleared, my kids went viral. I was pouring my morning coffee when the local news anchor's voice drifted from the kitchen TV. And in other headlines, a viral controversy is brewing around social influencer Rachel Holloway, whose recent Thanksgiving post from Cabo has sparked outrage. "I hope you're seeing this, Maggie," I murmured. "The world's teaching them what we couldn't." The wind rustled through the dried hydrangeas like her whisper in the dark. Inside, the phone buzzed again. I ignored it. But then, a single voicemail notification appeared on the screen. It was from Kevin. I hesitated before pressing play. His voice came through shaky, tired, and smaller than I remembered. "Dad, we need to talk. Please. It's important." For a long moment, I just stood there, the phone in my hand, the night holding its breath around me. Margaret once told me that truth doesn't always break a family. Sometimes it rebuilds it. But as her garden rustled in the dark, I couldn't tell which this would be. I stared at the phone, heart heavy but calm. Then I whispered, "All right, son, let's see if you mean it this time." They showed up at my doorstep like strangers who'd lost the address to their conscience. It was a cold, rainy evening, the kind that seeps into your bones. My porch light flickered as I opened the door. There they were, Kevin, Rachel, and Matthew, soaked, shivering, and looking a lot smaller than I remembered. Kevin spoke first. "Dad, can we come in?" I stepped aside without a word. The smell of wet coats filled the hallway. Their shoes left muddy prints across the same floor Margaret used to polish every Sunday. Rachel glanced at the family photos lining the wall, pictures of better times, her eyes catching on one of Margaret holding her first grandchild. She looked away quickly. Kevin tried to start light. "You've seen what's happening online. It's gotten out of hand." I didn't answer. I just walked into the living room, the one that used to hold Christmas mornings and late-night laughter, and sat down. They followed, still dripping. Matthew cleared his throat. "We messed up, okay? We didn't mean to hurt you. We just needed space." Hat word again. Space. The same word that had turned Thanksgiving into a solo meal, and their inheritance into someone else's blessing. Rachel folded her arms. "We didn't know Mom put those clauses in the will. That's not fair, Dad. You know she'd never want us cut off." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see my daughter. I saw a woman scrambling to fix a broken image, not a broken bond. "Fair," I said quietly. "Your mother spent 18 months fighting to stay alive while you three fought for convenience. She knew exactly what she was doing." Kevin's voice cracked. "Dad, come on. We made a mistake. Everyone grieves differently." I stood up, walked to my study, and came back with the envelope. Margaret's letter. The edges were soft from how many times I'd read it. I set it on the coffee table. "This," I said, "is what fairness looks like." Rachel hesitated, then reached for it. Her hands shook as she read aloud. "If you're reading this, our children have shown their true character. Don't feel guilty. You're not abandoning them. They've abandoned you." Her voice broke halfway through. Matthew stared at the floor. "You think money replaces love?" he asked bitterly. I took a slow breath. "No, Matthew. You replaced love with convenience." Silence. Just the ticking of the wall clock and the rain hitting the windows. Kevin finally spoke. "So that's it? We're just disowned?" I shook my head. "You were never disowned. You just stopped showing up." Rachel's eyes filled. "Dad, please. We can make it right. Tell us what to do." For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But I remembered Margaret's words. "Presence is love's proof." "You can't make up for absence with apologies," I said softly. "You had every chance. She was right here." Kevin's face hardened. "You think this is over, Dad? We'll fight this. You can't just take what's ours." I nodded slowly. "You're right. You can fight it. You've been fighting the wrong battles your whole lives." He stepped closer. "We mean it. We'll get lawyers if we have to." I met his glare with calm that only comes after too many sleepless nights. "Then you'll be suing your mother's last wish. Good luck explaining that to the world already watching." Rachel burst into quiet sobs. "Dad, please, don't do this." I turned toward the front door. "I'm not doing anything. You are." The rain outside had turned heavier, drumming against the porch like a heartbeat. I opened the door wide, letting the cold air sweep in. Kevin's voice followed me. We'll fight this, Dad! I looked back once. You already have, son, and you lost the moment you chose Cabo over your mother. Then I closed the door. The sound of rain swallowed their footsteps as they walked away. I leaned against the wood for a long while, breathing in the quiet. The same quiet that used to hurt now felt like peace. Margaret once said, "Forgiveness is a garden. It needs pruning before it can grow again." And tonight, I realized, I had just finished pruning mine. 2 days later, a lawyer's letter slid under my door like a snake. It was early morning. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and rain-damp soil. I was reading the paper when I noticed the envelope, white, thick, and heavy with arrogance. The return address said, Brandon Associates, Family Law. I didn't even need to open it to know whose idea it was. Still, I tore it open, slow and steady, like peeling off a bandage I'd already stopped feeling. The words were predictable. We hereby demand a full review of the estate and inheritance distribution of the late Margaret Johnson. And then the part that almost made me laugh. Our clients allege that Mr. Johnson's emotional instability and impaired judgment compromised fair execution of said estate. Emotional instability. They called it grief. I set the letter beside my coffee, steam rising like a ghost. Margaret would have found that poetic, her love turning into litigation. By noon, gossip feeds had it. The Cabo kids strike back, family feud over $2 million inheritance. I didn't bother reading the comments. The world had already picked sides. That evening I met Robert Mitchell. He was calm, papers neatly stacked. They're calling me unstable, I said. Can't blame them. I did talk to an empty chair at Thanksgiving. Grief isn't madness, Joe, he replied. Margaret anticipated this. He plugged in a flash drive. On the screen, Margaret. Thinner, tired, but her eyes still alive. Hi, love, she said. If you're watching this, our kids turned our will into a courtroom. Joe, I trust you. And to our children, family shows up. Not for photos, but for people. When it ended, Robert said quietly, It's time-stamped, witnessed, notarized, ironclad. She thought of everything, I said. She did. It overrides competency challenges. They don't have a case. I told him, send it to their lawyer. Add, case closed. That night, I ignored the kids' calls. I rewatched her message. It wasn't revenge. It was mercy with boundaries. A mirror for them to see themselves. By morning, Robert called. They folded. Kevin wants to talk. Tell him he's welcome, I said, but not about money. Rain softened outside. Her chair sat across from mine, steady, dignified. You were right, Maggie, I whispered. They showed their colors. You gave me the brush to finish the picture. A text arrived. Your wife was extraordinary. She still is, I murmured, then replied, case closed, lesson still open. By spring, her memorial garden bloomed, roses climbing higher than plaques. They asked me to speak at the dedication for the Margaret Johnson Cancer Research Fund. I said Margaret believed. Love isn't grand gestures, it's showing up. Blood makes you related, loyalty makes you family. When it ended, I found an envelope in Rachel's handwriting. I didn't open it. That Thanksgiving, the house was full again. Laughter, chaos, warmth. Her chair stayed empty, not from grief, but respect. Family isn't inherited, I told them, raising my glass. It's chosen. You all showed up. Later, I looked at her chair. Presence is a privilege, I said softly. And I understood at last. Inheritance isn't what you leave behind. It's who you leave behind, and whether they remember to show up.